would suggest to you may be the most complicated speech I've ever tried to put together for a meeting like this. One of the things in looking at the list of who's sitting out there, if somebody dropped a bomb on this building, we would shut down government, education, and business in the Inland Empire, as well as the nonprofit sector. So thank you all so much for being here. This question that I have up here on the screen is really what was at the core of what I've been doing for the last 7 months. And that is trying to answer the question, is there a way we can re-exert control over our own future and our own prosperity? I don't think it's news to any of you that our economy right now is a mess. Our levels of education of our adult population are not very good. So the question is, can we get control of that? Very briefly, because often this conference is about forecasting, let me just comment on that, and it sort of underscores the difficulty. When you look at recessions, sometimes economists will say they're V-shaped, in and out in a hurry. Obviously that's not going on. Usually they're U-shaped. You go down, you stay around for a while, and then you start to accelerate out. That hasn't gone on. My great worry this time was going to be the letter L, go down and never come back. But the fact is, it's really a check mark. Down and then out slowly. When we look at the U.S. economy, one of the things we see is a lot of, this chart is job growth each month or job losses. Altogether, we lost a huge number of jobs in this economy, over 8 million over the period of the recession. So far, we've gained back 1.7 million of those. So it is beginning to come back, but it's slow. If we look at last 3 years, forgetting what the little bit we lost in 2010, it was down 7.8 million, or a 5.7% decline in employment in the country. If we look at this year, the forecast right now is we'll bring back about 1.5% of that, which is 1,900,000 jobs from that loss. So we'll be about 24% of the way back, which, by the way, means we will not be 76% of the way back. Switching to California, there is nothing we can be proud of. In the last 3 years, we lost 1,279,000 jobs, an 8.2% decline. This year, with things having picked up, it looks like we're going to add back about 171,000 jobs, but that's only 13.4%, where the country is back by about a quarter. So the state is definitely lagging. Then we get to where we live. We've lost 161,397 jobs over the last 3 years in recession. We declined by 12.5%. In the first 3 months of this year, we're still slowly losing jobs. We're an area that has not recovered. What's the forecast? I'm forecasting 5,200 jobs added back this year. Hardly any. That is only a 3.2% recovery. Why? Because we are the bullseye of the mortgage crisis, and it's going to take a long time to work our way out of that. We've got some good things happening, largely in fields like logistics, that have started to come back. Manufacturing has gone to flat. Construction is still in a depression. Those are our big three. Hospitals, that's still growing, but that is not much growth. Now, this is the context for the discussions that Paul Granillo and I started with. I should begin by saying, again, how can we exert control over our region and our prosperity? This process started with the Southern California Association of Governments. Hassan Iqrada, the executive director, is here today. And Hassan started out working on a Southern California economic development strategy. I was allowed to do the Inland Empire portion of that, so we sort of blended these things together. Altogether, First of all, when you do this kind of work, you do an analysis. You ask, what's the data say? Well, I'm an economist, but I'm an economist that's also used to run political campaigns. So I don't believe the numbers. And so one of the things that I went out and did is I have interviewed a heck of a lot of you. Altogether, 122 business executives and community leaders. Paul Granillo is actually right. We one day went to go down the I-15 freeway from Temecula to Corona. I had an M6 at the time. I think we were going at about 120, and his job was to look up the overpasses to see whether or not the CHP was running around loose. But we lived, he did 55 or 60 of those interviews with me. And the idea was to understand from business leaders, community leaders, elected officials, people in the nonprofit sector and in the education sector, what's in the way? What's stopping this area from being able to get control of itself? And what you're going to be looking at now starts out is one of the priorities we heard. Priority number one from everybody was education. There's a sentence that I always like to use. There is no such thing as a poor, well-educated community. The opposite, unfortunately, is also true, and the Inland Empire is currently the opposite. You cannot have a prosperous area if we don't fix our educational issue. If you look at our adult population in San Bernardino County, 48.3% of adults 25 and over, not one college class. Riverside is not a lot better, 46.1%. If you reverse it and say you want high-end sectors require a high-end labor force. In San Bernardino County, 18.6% of adults a BA or higher, Riverside 19.7. You can see on the chart that's up there, we are the lowest of every county in Southern California but Imperial. We have a huge problem on our hands, both in the adults, but if you have a lot of adults who themselves are not well educated, you've also got a cultural issue of working with them to go after their children. So what are the barriers that we've identified? And I spent a lot of time with people like Pam Kluge, who is an expert at this, and she's what I consider, she's an academic, but what I love about Pam, she's also an entrepreneur. And a guy like Mike Gallo from Kelly Space, who found out that we weren't doing enough to train technicians working in the fields that are like machining, where we have the need for production machinists. So he put together a program, and he's already trained his first class, and they're all employed before they graduate. He's an entrepreneur in the sense in the private sector, but decided passionately to go after this. So what did we hear in talking to the educators? People like Leslie Rodden of the Alliance for Education in San Bernardino County, working with the superintendent in Riverside. This is what I would suggest to you. Everybody in here will say, I believe that we need to fix the education problem. The problem is, there is no demonstrable community commitment to changing it. We talk about it, sorry, almost knocked that down. We talk about it, we haven't organized ourselves to do it. Then we have the problem of state control of the funding. So the local boards really don't control their budgets. We have the state education code, which quite frankly is about that high, and if we could get some dynamite and blow it up, we could probably make some progress. You've got within the campuses, and I'm a former college professor, and I remember this vividly. You have campus bureaucracy and diffused power where there's really no one completely in charge that can move in a hurry. We have parents who basically say to the teachers, it's your job. No, it's not. It's ultimately parental. And you've got to go after that. We have a need to make sure we have articulation between the various levels of education. We have students who today are wanting to see a close relationship between what they're doing in the classroom and what's going on in the real world. And we've been starting to work on getting that covered. It's one of the things for those of you who are business leaders where we need your help, not just your funding, but to be involved in the process. We've had the inability to rapidly respond. You've got two cultures here, an education culture that moves like an oil tanker, and you've got a business culture which moves like a jet fighter, and it's very difficult to get one to respond to the other in a hurry. It is an issue we need to solve. And then oftentimes we find lack of urgency. Lack of urgency to get things done in some, not all, some school districts and in some administrations. So what do we need to do if we're going to fix this? Number one, there are a lot of experiments or programs looking at changing this. The whole idea of injecting into the school system programs that lead to science, technology, engineering, and math, and in relationship with the business community, and actually using those as you're being educated in them. We have a program here in the west end of the county called Online to College, started out in Montclair, where parents and children in the 3rd grade sign up and say, my child's going to college. Then the parents are required as part of that to go out to Chaffey College to get some familiarity with what a college is, because we're oftentimes dealing with parents with no experience themselves. The children get free tutoring, they're an identifiable group all the way through school, and when they graduate, if they've completed the program, they end up with free tuition and books at Chaffey College. Now, it's an experiment, but it has been working. In Montclair, it's been introduced now in Ontario. Esperanza has put together a Hispanic-led group to make this work. Therefore, it has the cooperation and the feeling of ownership from within the Hispanic community. When I was talking with Marie Pepicello, the former president of Chaffey College about 2 years ago, I said, how's that program going? And she laughed and she said, we had a problem this year. I said, what was that? She said, less students came to us. I said, where'd they go? She said, Cal State, UCLA, UCR. They didn't need to go to community college. It does work. So there's a tie. Alliance for Education in San Bernardino County that Leslie Rodden heads up. There you've got the schools and businesses working with the schools to help inject into the classroom business leaders who can talk reality. Pathways to Success with the Coachella Valley Economic Partnership. They've got a program where they've raised several $million. They've picked the 4 sectors that the economic group believes needs to be driven in the area. They put together scholarships, programs in the K through 12 system and at College of the Desert to start moving kids through it to occupations that they'll be able to do. There's the Harlem Education Activities Fund. Now this is one of the disasters. We had a bunch of major community leaders go to one of our school districts and offer, this is a program that involves the parents, the clergy, the teachers, all in a program to move ahead. The school district basically said, we don't want to bother. That, by the way, was the San Bernardino School District, and somebody ought to know that, because a piece of what we need to start doing, I believe, is naming names when you start to get things not done that need to be. We have the Technical Employment Training Center. I mentioned it a minute ago. This is the one that Mike Gallo put together, where he's training production machinists and they're going directly to work. Then we have Pam Klut's operation, the Federation for a Competitive Economy, where you've got the president of Cal State, the president of UCR, you have all the K through 12s, the 2 superintendents working together, and that's another whole effort now reaching out. And I'm sure there are others. Now here's the problem. We have to scale this up. I'm going to be 70 in June. I would like, before I die, to actually see us doing this stuff at a massive level rather than as experiments. So who do we need involved? Obviously we need the educational entrepreneurs, and we're going to get those folks organized that's Pam and Mike's job. We have the K through 12 educators that we need to have working on this. We have the school boards. We have good school boards and we have bad school boards. You've got a school board, I think I recall one school board where a member sued the board because they wouldn't call her captain instead of trustee or something crazy. Those people need to go do something else. And we can't allow that kind of craziness to be going on in our school system. We need the parents. We need you as business leaders. We need the ethnic communities. A good deal of this is an ethnic community problem, and it needs to come from the groups within them. We need the clergy involved. The fact that Paul Granillo is a former Catholic priest, you can believe me, we're going to be going after the Catholic Church if nobody else. We need the healthcare professionals involved. The media has to stand on this issue and start holding people accountable. The political leaders we need, because some of this is going to take legislative changes, and we need the foundations, and we need local corporate donors. This is not an education issue. This is a community issue, and all of that has to be involved. So within the structure of IEP, you've got the board. One whole line of that is the Education Council that Pam Clute and Mike Gallo will be heading up. The challenge: put together the successful entrepreneurs, design ways to scale it up, create a strategy for introducing those after they've decided what the best ideas are, vet them with the K through 12 and college educators, work with nonprofits to get together the funding, work with the business community for participation in funding, ask the schools to introduce the effort, and then work with parental groups, ethnic groups, clergy groups, business groups, and media groups to see that the strategies are getting executed. Only that kind of an effort, organized for the region, I suspect, can pull this off. And where necessary, seek legislative help. You know, there's been a thing for very many years for the African American community: a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And I would suggest to you it's time for us to stop wasting them here in the Inland Empire. Now, priority number 2. Oftentimes we hear when you get into these kinds of conferences, business friendly. Forget those terms. This is about one thing. Business friendly happens to help get you there, but it's about jobs. How do we create jobs for this region, for our population who lives here? Right now we have a 13.9% unemployment rate in March of 2011. There are 50 areas of the United States with 1 million or more people. We rank 50th. I don't know about you, that's not a list I would like to see this area on for any length of time. Our current labor force, we already know, as I showed you, is poorly educated. The result of that means whether we like it or not, and we may not like it, but we are stuck with the best paying jobs for a huge part of our population in manufacturing, in logistics and distribution, and in construction. This just gives you a picture of what I'm talking about. This is the average pay in the case of the wholesale trade. I put in the median to show they aren't that different. All blue collar, all those sectors. These are sectors where there's no barrier to going to work. You don't have to have high levels of training to start out. These are the alternatives without any particular training. There's a $13,000 gap. We're talking about above 40 and under 30. That's why blue collar for this region is so important. And there's a but to this, and it's a very important one. The blue collar sectors bring the risk of asthma and cancer because they are inherently sectors that are not the cleanest of work. Everybody would like us all to have computerized corporations and the rest. The fact is, not for a region like ours with this kind of a labor force. This is a picture of where the worst cancer risks are. Notice where it is. It's around the ports. It's out the 10, the 60, and the 210, and lands in the Inland Empire. So you have those sorts of issues that we have to face. Also, this hurts modest income families more than others, simply because they tend to live near factories and rail yards and ports and freeways. So we have that issue. So how has California handled this? We've handled it with single-issue regulatory agencies. California Air Resources Board, Southern California Air Quality Management, California EPA, California Water Resources Control, and I think I could go on for 3 hours. We have a huge number of agencies, each one of which does one thing. And that's all they are basically mandated to think about. All right, there have been 2 decades or longer of that type of approach to our economy, because that's basically what we've really done as a state. Worry about that. 2 results. First, what about air quality? I don't know about you, but I can actually see mountains now in this inland empire, which I didn't know were there when I moved here. The air, in terms of ozone, much better. If we look at some of the particulate matters, it is improving. Is it perfect? No. But it has been improving. The strategies have been working. On the other hand, there is the second result. It's put downward pressure on the blue-collar sectors, and therefore on blue-collar jobs. Dun & Bradstreet, these data come from Jack Kaiser, who recently passed away from LA. 2,565 jobs since 2007 left the state and took 109,000 jobs with them. Why? Because the regulatory environment was such they were out of here. But that's not the problem, companies leaving. That's just a little of it. What's worse is if you interview manufacturers, you find repeatedly they're putting their jobs outside the state if they have the choice. They may stay here, they may stay steady state, they're adding their people in other states. They won't consider, if they aren't here, coming here. You talk to people in economic development, like Mary Jane Alasso, what do you hear? They get laughed at when they talk to firms outside the state about coming to the state. When they meet, people like Sarah Monday over in Riverside, when they meet outside the area, what do they hear? They hear that the California legislature is the best recruiting tool for Arizona or Utah or somewhere else. That is a disaster. Forbes, we have the worst competitive environment in the country. Now, I interviewed a lot of manufacturers. What do they say? Number one, they support environmental regulation. They live here too. The problem isn't the regulation, it is the rapid regulatory instability that is the issue. Where what you have 1 month isn't the regulation, a year later, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, and you cannot plan, and business cannot succeed in that kind of environment. When you talk about one of our major sectors, which is logistics, 43% of all the containers entering the United States come in through LA and Long Beach harbors. Huge competitive advantage. The one thing the California legislature did absolutely right was to put California on the West Coast. But what are the people who manage the cargo saying? They want to reduce the dependence on this region because our political decision-making makes them very nervous. So they're diverting containers up to Canada, up to Seattle. They are looking at the expansion of the Panama Canal and taking it around through the Panama Canal directly into the East Coast. That is our most powerful competitive advantage. When I did an analysis of what drove the upturn from 2000 to 2007, I thought the answer would be construction. And construction played a role, but it was second. First was logistics and distribution because of the competitive advantages in Southern California. We can't afford to lose that advantage. Then there's construction, whether it's homes or offices or retail sites or industrial buildings. By the way, Ito Benzivi, I saw come in, that's Ito's building. It's only a 1.8 million square feet, 50 feet high. The entire building is essentially a gigantic internal computer with about 1,000 people massaging it and never actually touching cargo when it goes through there. If you ever get a chance to go through that thing, it's amazing. Well, we have a thing in California called the Environmental Quality Act, or as it may also be termed, the California Let's Delay Construction Until They Run Out of Money Act. And this is not a funny issue, actually. This is real, because the act isn't just used for environmental quality. If you do every single thing right, all somebody needs is about 180 bucks to put in a thing and file suit, and that holds the process up and holds it up and holds it up. You can't compete in that environment with other states. Then we have a couple of short-term issues. One of them is one of the things that we interviewed were a large number of hospital administrators. Several of you who are in this room right now. What did we hear? Every one of the hospitals has a project ready to go ahead, and it's all tied up in OSHPD, which is their regulatory agency, and because it's tied up there, you can't get construction started. Excuse me, this state's in a recession. So we need to break that kind of thing loose. Then I was on the state commission looking at things like public-private partnerships to bring private capital to the market to start working on our infrastructure. However, we have the Caltrans Engineering Union, which has successfully delayed public-private partnerships, delayed the use of design-build, in order to pull all of the work into Caltrans, which in turn can't get it back out the door in any kind of timely fashion. This kind of stuff is nuts. We have a recession going on, and the sector in the most trouble is construction. Then we have a little thing called the Endangered Species Act, or as I would call it, Anything But Humans Act. This is something some of you know about, the Delhi sandflower-loving fly. It only cost us several $1 million to move Arrowhead Medical Center to about 50 feet away because it was interfering with the habitat of the fly. Now, I happen to be an environmentalist years ago, and when we were worried about bears. Bears, flies, I don't know. But now we have a new threat, and this one is probably the biggest threat to the Inland Empire economy that exists. It is called the Santa Ana sucker. It is a fish. It's off the city of Riverside and Corona in the Santa Ana River. We have a group called the Center for Biological Diversity, which files a lawsuit on everything, at least involving species. They worked and got California to pass a law that said water agencies must certify 20 years of water or you can't build any major project. Any major project. They then worked and got the Delta smelt, which is a protected species up in the Central Valley. And as a consequence of the Delta smelt, this year, with all this rain and all that snowpack, they can't fill all the allocations that are needed to be filled right now. But now we have the Delta smelt, which has been listed now, and they took a chunk of territory which hadn't been in there before because of the biological diversity, and they basically said it must include the centers of the section of the Santa Ana River that is dry. Now, last time I checked, that's not where fish went. But they have now declared that, despite all of the things that our water agencies have tried, they're basically saying all the water that comes out of the San Bernardino and eastern San Gabriel Mountains cannot be kept. It must be allowed to go straight through to the ocean. That is our water supply, our local water supply. If that lawsuit is not overturned, it shuts down all our future growth completely. No major project could be built, and Fish and Wildlife becomes in charge of the Inland Empire economy. So the result of all of this is unemployment is higher than it needs to be. Underemployment is a constant difficulty where people aren't working at jobs they need to be. And we have lack of access to jobs leading to the middle class, which is essentially your blue-collar jobs. Now, what happens because of that kind of pressure on the families? You have abnormal levels of divorce, spousal abuse, drug and alcohol abuse, suicide, lack of timely medical care, and I submit to you, those are public health issues as well. So you've got public health and public health, both of them, different kinds of public health, but nobody is looking at that second one. Then we have the makeup of our population. We have a complex population in the inland region. 57.6% of San Bernardino County, 51.4% of Riverside County are either Hispanic or African American, and those percentages are rising. When you look at the data, you find in both cases, over 60% of the adults no college class. An inordinately important need for these blue-collar jobs. I would submit to you that suppressing blue-collar jobs is also a social justice issue. We hear a lot about social justice in terms of cleaning up the environment. We hear nothing about social justice in terms of suppressing jobs for people that need them. So I would suggest to you, we have an imbalance here. It's the same issue, except we put all of our eggs on the one side of this. That's why I've got these scales tilted the way I do. In effect, after years of focusing solely on the environment, blue-collar job creation has become our forgotten priority in the state of California. So we have major challenges when it comes to the economy because of this lack of balance between these two issues. We need to be holding the Inland Empire legislators responsible to support legislation creating a pro-jobs agenda. That's what we need here. We need to find a way, and I'm using this word advisedly, to compel their support for the people who live here, not their party leaders, or their ideology. That may be, in the current, I used to run political campaigns. So I was the enemy. I will tell you that tends to be the way you think when you're in that particular sector, unless you're afraid that if you do those things, you'll be defeated. So we've got to change that dynamic. We need a coordinated business strategy to deal with these issues that involve business, local government, and labor. Just stop and think for a minute. If you're a construction worker that could be working on a hospital job, what the effect of not having those approvals is on your business. We also have allies. This has been discussed all over Southern California. I've been in the meetings. SCAG has talked about. The Orange County Business Council, top priority. LA Economic Development Corporation, same thing. Southern California leadership. We need to be working with them to start to change these dynamics. We have, as you heard from Paul, the Inland Empire Business Council. Dan Rendler was the chairman of the board, currently heading that up. What's the agenda? Well, a piece of the agenda, as Paul said, is a related group, a political action committee, and it's very interesting. In one of his conversations with one of our members of Congress, before he even said hello, the first thing he said is, "What's this I hear about a political action committee?" That's exactly the reaction you want. Now, manufacturing. We've got a lot of different kinds of manufacturing in the Inland Empire. You've got California Steel at one end. We've got a Hangar 24, which is a product of the Small Business Development Center, working with a young couple that decided we didn't have enough beer. I happen to agree with them. Good work. We have a company like Watson Pharmaceutical that does a lot of work in generic drugs. You've got Millipore, the bioscience company down in Temecula. A lot of different kinds of manufacturing going on here. What's the agenda? Number one, we need legislation creating an entity that can independently review the job impact of agency rules and delay or overturn those creating heavy job losses. And you'll notice in parentheses after these statements, sometimes you're going to see AB or SB. There are bills that we can be working with, thanks to SCAG staff, in identifying them. Second, we need legislation to mandate or incentivize production in California equipment that agencies are requiring firms to install. Right now, you come to a company and you say, install this piece of technology, the odds of it being made in this state are practically zero. That's nuts. What it says is we spend billions on cleaning the environment, and Detroit or Washington or Utah get the economic benefit. Excuse me, if we're going to do it, we've got to figure out a way that we get the job impacts of it as well. Legislation creating a depression-like schedules for allowing firms to amortize mandated equipment before being forced to mandate it for even newer equipment. One of the issues you run into in manufacturing is an agency comes along and says, install this or we'll fine you. So you go to the market, you borrow the money, install the equipment. 2 years later they come back and say, new technology, install this or we'll fine you. You haven't paid for the last one yet. How many times before you start putting your company or your growth outside the state? We need legislation recreating the investment tax credit in equipment that we have in California. And the last thing we need to do is actually some research. We need to understand what's happening to our smaller companies because of the regulatory costs and find a way to alleviate that. You are not going to get a recovery out of major corporations. It's not the way the economy works. It's the Hangar 24s of the world that cause the economy to go up. It's the smaller entrepreneurial firms, and if we get them so tied up, that can't happen. What about in construction? First of all, we've got to start putting pressure on OSHPD on the approval of hospital projects. It's Southern California Economic Development, the LA Economic Development Corporation estimated 232,000 construction jobs held up because they can't get their work done. We also need to take a message from LAEDC, which has talked about limiting the ability of anybody walking down the street with about 180 bucks to file a lawsuit, and maybe turn that over to, say, the Attorney General, so that you only end up, if you've got a project that's done everything right, they still get lawsuits filed. We need to take away that power because of what it's doing to our economy. We need to start taking a message from the judge who's working on the Delta Smelt, who in his ruling has increasingly talked about the need to balance the needs of endangered species with human beings. He's basically said, I don't see an intent of Congress that the needs of human beings are simply discounted in this process. We need to be looking at that seriously. And then we need to be working with business groups and the cities of this region to begin to standardize and increase the efficiency of our entitlement processes. Some cities are really good, others are not. We need to standardize this and get that kind of a discussion going. What about the logistics agenda? Ontario International Airport is in trouble. It should not be in trouble. And frankly, I would like to see it pulled away from lawless control and into this area. There was a package of bills, two times passed by Senator Lowenthal, to figure out a way to finance off-port infrastructure. And the idea is you take the city of Riverside, a train stops, cuts the city in half. We need to get the grade separations and things like that financed. Lowenthal said when he got a new governor, he would in fact put legislation back in. We need to see that happen. We need to expand the authority for public-private partnerships so that we can in fact bring more private money into building our infrastructure, which is crucial to moving goods through our region. We also need to give local government access to public-private partnerships for their projects. And we need to create personal income tax credits for people who invest in infrastructure in the same way we've done it in the past for things like affordable housing. Again, you will notice there are SB numbers attached to this because a lot of this is legislation that has been proposed. What about energy? You've got SoCal Gas. Southern California is doing solar on roofs, CNG and LNG trucks, wind power, geothermal, biogas. These are all techniques that we need to be thinking about. We have to decrease our dependence on foreign oil. For if no other reason, my son has twice been in Iraq getting shot at, and the money that's being shot at, or the bullets shot at him, are being paid for by us. This is national security. Forget the cost at the pump. This is just something that we as Americans have to get done. We also have to worry about whatever we're doing in energy policy, not pushing electrical prices to where manufacturers in this state are uncompetitive. We need to be incentivizing renewable natural gas supplies, biogas, fuel cells using renewable natural gas. One of my clients happens to be a large company that runs landfills, and one of the things they're now making money at is selling biogas off those landfills. We need to, again, eliminate the CEQA delays so things can be built efficiently, and we need to be incentivizing rooftop solar and solar water heating. A high-end strategy we've heard a lot about. It is not an impossibility for our region, but it's not possible everywhere. This is JCM Engineering in Ontario. You've got ESRI in Redlands. We have our university community, UCR, Loma Linda, Cal State, University of Redlands, Laverne University. In fact, a lot of you are here today. Filming, thank you to my good friend Sherry Davis. Believe it or not, Sherry has brought into this region over a period of 14 years approximately $1.2 billion in commercials and major motion pictures. That's a huge piece of the high-end part of the economy. What do we do here? One, going back to what I said earlier, we've got to execute a meaningful education strategy. It's long-term, it's trench warfare. It isn't going to start overnight, but I've been listening to this question for 48 years of doing this, and I'd really like to see it started at some point. We need to continue supporting UCR Medical Center, or Medical School. We need the UC Regents to come up with a policy to rapidly and cost-effectively transfer technology to California-based companies. This is not currently university policy. Excuse me, we pay them. We do not pay them to create technology and then sell it to Minnesota or Korea. We need that kind of policy put in place. We need to organize an economic strategy among cities with the labor or the office complexes that can in fact compete for high-end firms. This is not every city. It's particularly the cities around the edges of the Inland Empire where we saw a mass migration of well-educated workers in the last round of the housing sector. Film production, we need to continue to incentivize it in this state. I believe, and I may be wrong on this, and Sherry will probably tell me if I am, but there's a whole CSI LA that's now on television, filmed in Louisiana. That's crazy. We need to support the creation of the equipment. You've heard perhaps of the Public Policy Institute of Southern California, of California. They're listened to all the time by the legislature. Where are they located? San Francisco. What is their value system? San Francisco. Excuse me, we are not the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, 42% of the adult population has a bachelor's or higher degree. Down here, you saw the numbers, way, way lower than that, under 20. In Southern California as a whole, it's way lower. We need a Southern California Public Policy Institute representing the needs and values of Southern California. We need to be working with high-tech firms that are already here to find ways to expand their sectors. And again, we need to execute a high-end strategy in the cities with the labor. Finally, the last piece of this agenda, and it is large, I agree. It is tough. But if we're going to fix this, this is the sort of stuff we need to be doing. International trade, the value of the dollar. It was up, if you took a scale of 100, at 112.2 in 2002. It was at 84 in 2009. It's currently at 69.7. So what? I'm an alcoholic. I love wine. This is Latesh, my favorite wine. You can buy it right now for $2,000 a bottle. It used to only cost $1,500. It's kind of gone up in price. Why? Because the dollar value went down because it's produced in Burgundy. This is what I'm now forced to drink, which is Heights from California. Wonderful wine. By the way, if I'm in England, Latesh, I can now go get Heights. It's much cheaper. How much have they moved? Latesh has gone up in price 37.8%. Compared to 2002, 17% compared to where it was in 2009. Turn it around. Exports of U.S. goods, they're 37.8% cheaper than they were in 2002 in other countries. They're 17% cheaper than they were in 2009. Has that had an effect? Answer, yes. These are export containers through LA and Long Beach harbors. They have gone up in a straight line. They have more than doubled from 2002 to 2011. This year alone, they're up another 8% so far if the trend continues and it's strengthening. So what do we need to be doing here? First of all, I think we need to be regionalizing the efforts by individual cities and counties who are involved in export strategies. We have to identify the traditional firms that are exporting already, learn from them, and assist them. We have to identify immigrant-owned export businesses. One of the advantages we have if we use it is a huge immigrant population living in our region where you've got people who are entrepreneurs and they're very comfortable with selling back to their native countries. They understand that process. You have an old organization of those folks over in Riverside. An Asian group has just been started up. We need to teach local firms how to engage in exporting. And when we do export missions, we need to be formalizing the occasions. Instead of having public officials go get wined and dined, we need working meetings where you take local firms, match them with potential clients in the foreign country, and all you have is meetings between those people. Leave the rest of it alone and let's do business. Now, priority number three. Number three, local control. The voters of this state have repeatedly said they would like to have local control. But California government continues to control a huge part of local government finances and to try and dictate its functions. That has to stop. Now, with city and county budgets under stress, a piece of what we would like to see created is a cooperative economic development strategy using the county and city economic developers of our region as a regional team. We've got some really skilled people working in this field. We need to be able to harness their skills that already exist, not duplicate them, use them, because they're very, very good at what they do. We need to execute strategies for high-end jobs in those cities that are competitive for that form of job. We need to execute strategies for blue-collar jobs in cities or parts of the region where that's what's necessary for the economy. We need to have a coordinated outreach to local firms where we're trying to retain them or expand them. And we need to coordinate outreach to location professionals. One of the people in this room, Mary Jane Olasso, sits on a group called CORENET, where the location professionals, who are the screen through which firms make decisions where to go, she's been the Southern California president of that organization. It's those kinds of skills we need to be harnessing for our region. Obviously, we have to keep the enterprise zones, and obviously, subject to some changes that the cities are agreeing to, we need to keep our redevelopment agencies, because every economic development director I know is financed through redevelopment. Cut it out, and we're left naked when the folks start showing up from Utah and Arizona and Nevada to steal our companies. And then we need to start undertaking the political effort to move funding sources from the state down to our cities and counties. These are the folks that have agreed to help work with the partnership. Ron Leverage, the mayor of Riverside, Marion Ashley, the supervisor in Riverside, Pat Morris, the mayor of San Bernardino, Janice Rutherford, the new supervisor from San Bernardino County, to help us move this agenda forward. Finally, the fourth, the quality of life agenda. If any of you saw the papers a couple of days ago, there was a whole article about the fact that the Inland Empire, when it comes to the major things on which we look at quality of life, is way down the list amongst the major metro areas of California. If you look here, life expectancy, I've only got 8 years left. If I lived in San Francisco, I'd have 11. Excuse me, let's get that fixed fast. Median income, 53.9 here. You can see it's the lowest. The health index, what's that include? The health index is every kind of thing that you have, teen births, emphysema, cancer, lack of access to doctors. We rank, again, last. Human development, the whole combination of standard of living and all these other things, we rank last. We've got to fix this. So what are the difficulties facing the nonprofits that have to do this? We need a quality of life if we're going to draw high-end workers and companies. The quality of life issues are greater here than for the state. Government and business both been weakened by the recession. Those are two of the arms to take care of quality of life issues. It puts incredible stress on the third leg of the stool, which are our nonprofits, to fill the gap. Only $3 per capita in foundation support in San Bernardino County right now. The California average is $119. No wonder we're not able to take care of those sorts of issues. For the whole Inland Empire, including Riverside, it's $27. If we could just get up to the state average, it would bring in $380 million extra dollars a year in foundation support for quality of life issues in the Inland Empire. The sector, in addition to everything else, is quite understaffed and has limited professional support. This is why it has become so important that Grover Trask, chairman of the board of the Community Foundation, Dan Foster, have brought the foundation into the family, because now when they go to the California Endowment, when they go to the MacArthur Foundation, when they go to the Irvine Foundation, they are not representing a piece of the Inland Empire, they're representing that entire network that's sitting in front of you on that page. We've got to dramatically increase the major grants, and a year from now, we're going to take Dan Foster standing up here and applaud him for having had a major effect on that. My apologies for putting you on the spot, Daniel. We need their priorities, which are to fund the educational strategy, to fund community health, to scale up the capabilities of our nonprofits in general, and to help fund the development and coordination in arts and culture. Those are their priorities, and they are crucial if we're going to add a high end to our economy. Now, to do all of this, which is a huge agenda, and I agree with you, but what is the alternative? The alternative is where we sit as we're in this room right now. We need to work with allies who specialize in specific regions of the Inland Empire. And we have a lot of those. CVEP down in the Coachella Valley, the Greater Riverside Chamber of Commerce, Southwest California down in Temecula, Murrieta, the Valley Economic Development Corporation over in Hemet, San Jacinto, EcoPac with the cities up in the pass area on the way out to Coachella, and then groups that have organized to influence the politics of our area, Inland Action, the Monday Morning Group, the Valley Group, also others, for instance, there are representatives in the room today of the Inland Empire Hispanic Business Organization. Crucial to have this network working together on these issues. The idea is not to compete with anybody. The idea is to put the full force of this together. Now, Paul already talked about the two other functions that IEP will continue. One is Sherry Davis and the Film Commission. The other is Vincent McCoy to continue training entrepreneurs. The management of IEP's job in all this is to convene the members of this network, to coordinate so that the groups can interact and have access to one another, to raise the money to make this work, to develop and provide the data that various groups need, to conduct the kind of research necessary to move this forward, to work on strategies as I've been showing you here today, and to conduct outreach. So when we look at the organization, there's Paul Granillo and Carrie Mendez. They'll be working on execution. As Paul said, I've been willing to join and help out with a lot of the economics work. Now, a final note. Recessions, I believe, have a way of focusing the mind. Hopefully, when we call on you or your firm to help us with this complex strategy, you'll be prepared to help. Understand, if you're in the sector of commercial brokerage, you have access to NAIOP. If you're a real estate agent, you have access to the Board of Realty. If you're a developer, you've got access to the BIA. If you're involved in corporations that are manufacturing, there's manufacturing councils. There's a lot of fingers that can be brought to bear if we can agree on the agenda. And we need your help to do that, to reach and coordinate that network. Because I would suggest to you, only if we do this together can we begin to re-exert control over our prosperity and our community. I thank you very much for the opportunity.